I bet you never really hear about Indonesia. It's a discreet giant, but one that's beginning to make its mark on the world stage, and it's sitting on an asset that could make it a major player in the global economy. Indonesia is a country located between Southeast Asia and Oceania, between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. It's an archipelago of more than 18,000 islands, some of the largest of which are shared with neighboring countries. Borneo is shared with Malaysia and Brunei, New Guinea with Papua New Guinea, and Timor with East Timor since 2002. Singapore, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Australia are also close by. You really have to realize just how big this country is. From east to west, it stretches for more than 5,000 kilometers, which is about the distance between France and Afghanistan. It's gigantic. The country has 280 million inhabitants, 157 million of whom live on the island of Java. To give you an idea, Java's about the size of Greece, but Greece has only about 10 million inhabitants. Java has a population density of almost 1,200 inhabitants per square kilometer. There's 60 million in Sumatra, 17 million in Borneo, 20 million in Celebes, 15.5 million in the Lesser Sunda Islands, 5.5 million in New Guinea, and 3 million in the Moluccas. It's the world's largest Muslim country, with 87% of the population practicing Sunni Islam. There's a Christian minority representing around 10% of the population, or almost 30 million people. There are also other religious minorities, notably a Hindu minority representing the vast majority of the inhabitants of the island of Bali. Indonesia is also a largely multi-ethnic country, with the Javanese on the island of Java accounting for around 40% of the country's population. There have been emancipation movements and ethnic and religious tensions. In East Timor, for example, gaining independence from Indonesia in 2002 after more than 25 years of Indonesian occupation, and also Papuan independence movements in New Guinea, which have been active since the region was annexed by Indonesia in 1963. Politically, Indonesia made its democratic transition at the end of the 1990s. Before that, it's only had 2 presidents between 1945 and 1998. Finally, it's the economic aspect that is of particular interest to us here, and its repercussions on Indonesia's international standing. Indonesia is well known for its palm oil production and has been criticized for it. In 2023, palm oil exports accounted for almost $24 billion, or just over 9% of the country's exports. The most productive provinces are Riau, Central and West Kalimantan, and North Sumatra. In 2022, the leading importers of Indonesian palm oil in dollars were India, China, Pakistan, and the United States. But to get an idea of what $24 billion worth of exports represents, we need to compare it with other sectors of the Indonesian economy, and with the total value of exports in the same year. Here are some of the most important sectors in terms of exports. You can see crude oil and petroleum products. Indonesia used to be a major exporter of oil. In fact, it was its main source of income in the past. Among the largest historical fields are the Minas and dairy fields in Sumatra. But Indonesia's gradually reduced its oil exports and developed other industries, notably coal and later stainless steel, which have to some extent replaced oil as an export product, as you can see from this graph for coal. China's by far the largest importer of steel, accounting for $18.3 billion of the $27.6 billion worth of steel exports in 2023. In the case of coal, the customer base is more diversified, with China in second place in 2023 behind India, as well as Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And you could see on the map where coal's produced, mainly on the island of Borneo. Iron is also found in Borneo, but also on the island of Taliabu and in Sumatra. In 2023, coal and steel exports accounted for 13% and 11% of the total value of Indonesia's exports. So if we take palm oil, coal, and steel, we're up to 33%. These 3 sectors account for a third of Indonesia's exports. These sectors underpin much of the Indonesian economy today and have enabled the country to maintain strong growth. But these are not the only assets that Indonesia is counting on in the future if it's to truly emerge as a major economic power on the international stage. Its soil contains another precious metal that's used in the manufacturing of electric batteries, particularly those used in electric vehicles that the world will need to reduce carbon emissions. And that metal is nickel. Nickel production in Indonesia has exploded in recent years, rising from 130,000 tons in 2015 to 600,000 tons in 2018 and 1.8 million tons in 2023. To give you an idea, Indonesia's accounted for 5% of global production in 2015, rising to 50% in 2023, and the country has 42% of the world's proven reserves. Today, nickel's processed into a finished product that's mainly used in the production of stainless steel, which currently accounts for 70% of world nickel production. Indonesia already operates refineries to produce this finished product, but it wants to create others to produce cathodes and nickel sulfate, products used in the production of electric batteries and with much higher added value. The battery sector could account for 26% of global nickel consumption by 2030 and 36% by 2040, almost all of which will be used in electric vehicles. And Indonesia does not intend to stop at cathodes and nickel sulfate. It wants to be a player in the entire production chain. At the Karawang site, for example, there are plans to build facilities for the production of electric batteries. In 2020, Indonesia's even imposed an export ban on raw nickel, forcing companies to carry out processing in Indonesia. The same ban has been in place for other products since 2009, for bauxite since 2023, and perhaps for copper in 2024. And this strategy is working, as smelters have built and many more are planned in Indonesia, with the aim, as I said, of exporting higher value-added products. But export bans on raw materials are not the only protectionist measures introduced by Indonesia. In 2017, the government decided to limit foreign ownership of mining companies operating in Indonesia. In concrete terms, 6 years after a mine comes into production, the proportion held by foreign capital can no longer exceed 80%, and this limit decreases each year to reach a maximum of 49% after 10 years. This rule was introduced to partially nationalize some of Indonesia's largest foreign mining companies, since it's often the state that buys back the shares. China's been Indonesia's main partner, enabling it to develop its mining sector, notably through investments made as part of China's new Silk Roads project. China's invested around $50 billion in projects in Indonesia between 2013 and 2022. Chinese companies are shareholders in Indonesia's 4 largest nickel mining sites: Morowali, Wida Bay, Pamala, and Obi Island. The huge investments made and the resulting increase in production caused the nickel price to fall in 2023 after peaking in December 2022. So why is China investing so heavily in Indonesia's mining sector? Well, because it has no real choice, and also because it's cheaper in the short term. Since the ban on the export of raw nickel from Indonesia, prices have tended to fall as sellers have been unable to export abroad and have had to turn to a domestic market with fewer opportunities. Chinese investors, on the other hand, have been able to make massive investments and, through their influence on the Indonesian nickel sector, have also been able to influence prices to their advantage. What's more, with local access to cheap Indonesian coal resources, the smelters that process the nickel have been able to operate at relatively low energy prices. In the end, Chinese investors are winners in the short term. But it remains to be seen what will happen when the Chinese have to give up their 51% stake in Indonesian mining companies. These protectionist measures have also worried other partners, such as the dispute over the Grasberg mine in New Guinea, the world's largest gold mine and third largest copper mine. The mine was operated by PT Freeport Indonesia, a subsidiary of the US company Freeport-McMoRan. The government succeeded in buying 51% of PT Freeport Indonesia's shares, as required by law. Negotiations were long, with Freeport-McMoRan apparently unhappy, but the American company eventually relented in return for an extension of the mine's life until 2041. Another example is the European Union, which has complained to the WTO on this issue, arguing that Indonesia's not respecting the free trade clauses and protectionist restrictions imposed on WTO members. This dispute is still ongoing today. So we can see that Indonesia's protectionist measures don't please all of its economic partners, but so far it's stayed the course, and they're confident that it'll reap significant economic benefits in the future. In terms of international policy, and as a major country in the Indo-Pacific, Indonesia's strategy is to remain a non-aligned country when it comes to the US-China rivalry. As we've seen, it trades with China and welcomes its foreign direct investment. On the other hand, it also cooperates with the United States on economic issues, but especially on security issues. This is exemplified by the military exercises known as Garuda Shield. In the 2023 edition, many countries participated in the exercise, but the bulk of the troops involved were American or Indonesian. Some of these exercises took place on islands in the Indonesian province of Riau, where the Natuna Islands are located. While these islands are Indonesian, part of their territorial waters are claimed by China via its famous 9-dash line, which runs across a large number of exclusive economic zones of countries bordering the South China Sea. Chinese fishing vessels and coast guards regularly enter the waters of the Natuna Islands, although China recognizes Indonesia's sovereignty over them. In 2023, Prabowo Subianto, then Indonesian defense minister and now future president of the republic, he'll take office at the end of 2024, made a statement. During a visit by U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Prabowo declared that China's claims in the South China Sea were not consistent with international law. Shortly afterwards, it was announced that Jakarta would receive American F-15 fighter jets and Black Hawk helicopters. Nevertheless, Indonesia remains a non-aligned country, but it knows how to use rhetoric to its advantage, even if the US-China rivalry sometimes gets in the way. For example, Joe Biden's introduced protectionist measures, notably on the purchase of electric vehicles. Americans can get a credit of up to $7,000 for the purchase of an electric vehicle, subject to certain conditions, including that the batteries must not have been produced or assembled by certain countries that are adversaries of the United States: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. But given that China has a significant stake in Indonesian companies operating in these sectors, how will the two countries deal with this problem? Will the US consider that China's too involved in the production of Indonesian batteries? Finally, as I said, a new president will take office at the end of 2024. Prabowo Subianto. He's the former Minister of Defense under the 10-year presidency of Joko Widodo. Prabowo says he wants to continue along the same lines as his predecessor. For the topics mentioned in this video, this means continuing to develop the nickel industry and remaining neutral in the US-China rivalry. It should be noted that Prabowo has a less than glorious past as a military officer and has been accused of abuses, notably during the management of the 1998 anti-regime riots and then during the conflict that led to East Timor's independence in 2002. He was dismissed from the army for dishonorable conduct, exiled to Jordan, banned from entering the US, and denied a visa by Australia. That was years ago and may not affect his international policy, although relations with East Timor are unlikely to be warm. So there you have it, a brief overview of this little-known country that's quietly and discreetly making its way. I'll give you one last piece of information. I haven't gone into detail about the economic impact of the nickel industry on the population, because we don't have enough hindsight. But what we are beginning to see is that while poverty rates in the country as a whole are slowly falling, and that's not necessarily due to the nickel industry alone, poverty rates near the mines are tending to rise slightly, because it's not necessarily the local people who are employed in the mines and who benefit from this sector. And near the mines, local farmers sometimes find their work made more difficult by pollution, for example. So the question of the benefits of the nickel industry for the local population needs to be looked at in the longer term. That's all for today. Thank you for watching this video. You want to help me promote it on YouTube? Leave a like, or even better, a comment to boost the algorithm. And don't forget to subscribe. This is the English version of a French channel about geopolitics, and many more videos are yet to come, so stay tuned. Bye for now.